Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday and welcome. It's good to be here with you again. I want to say thank you to Brent for leading songs for us this morning and also helping on the Lord's table. We put you to work today, Brent. We enjoyed our time on vacation. There are three things really that are assured to happen when we're visiting with another congregation on a Lord's Day. And I just want to share those with you to kind of introduce this idea. Whenever I'm visiting someplace, I always grab a bulletin, if there is one there. First of all, just because I like to look at the other bulletins to give me ideas about how I could help with ours, improve ours. But also, you can learn a lot about a group of people, about a congregation, by seeing what's all in their bulletin. So we always try and grab one. The second thing, which I'm not entirely proud of, but normally when we're visiting another congregation, the thoughts pop into my head about who in this congregation would fit with someone in the congregation we're visiting with. And so we're kind of looking around and watching and seeing what happens. And maybe there's one person who seems to do a lot and he's always involved. You say, well, that's the Alan Binge. They're always putting him to work. Or maybe there's someone who's especially careful of others to make sure and reach out to them. You say, well, they're like the Barbara Kinnan of that congregation. They're so caring and so loving. Now the third thing that always happens when we're visiting a congregation is I ask Hannah for a piece of paper. I always want a piece of paper, but I never bring one, but she helps me out. She'll give me one. And I use that to take notes. I take notes because it helps me to engage, to see what's going on in the lesson, but also later I can look at those notes and work on them a little bit more and share some of the lessons that I was able to enjoy with our church family here. This is a study that was going on at the Broadway Church of Christ. They were going through 1 Peter, and I thought how interesting, because it wasn't too long ago we did that with Steve in the Sunday morning class. But a section in particular in 1 Peter chapter 4, and they were talking about attitude. And that's the lesson that I want to bring for us this morning. Specifically, this phrase, this plea, Lord, help me change my attitude. Help me to shape my way of thinking. And that's what an attitude is. It's a way of thinking or feeling about a certain person or a certain thing. And that way of thinking or feeling shapes your behavior. It influences how you will react and how you will relate to everything around you. So attitude is hugely important. Thomas Jefferson said, nothing can stop the man who has the right mental attitude from achieving his goal. Nothing can help the man who has the wrong mental attitude. And that importance really bears out, especially when we talk about the Christian life. Spiritually, trying to be a servant of Christ, trying to live after Him. If you don't have the proper attitude, you will fall short. The key text here in 1 Peter, in chapter 4, I'm going to read verse 6 as well as verse 7 for us, but understand the lesson is all based in verse 7. 1 Peter chapter 4, 6 and 7 says, For this reason the gospel was preached also to those who are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. But the end of all things is at hand, therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers. Now understand what's happening here in 1 Peter chapter 4. He's just talked about Christ's position as the Savior and as the head of the church. He will judge the living and the dead at that great last day. And so as he starts to talk about those who are dead in verse 6, it's kind of a double reference, not only to those who may be physically dead, but also to those who are spiritually dead, living after the flesh instead of living after the Spirit. And you can see that in the text. But then you get to verse 7, and he's really trying to motivate these readers and us today to have the proper way of thinking, to be aware of so much important truth. He says again, verse 7, The end of all things is at hand, therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers. This is a command, but it's also an urgent plea. It is necessary, it is needful, it is required that you would realize these things, that you would be molded into the way you ought to be. And that's the idea when we say, Lord, help me change my attitude, or help me to shape my way of thinking. We're saying, let me be more like you. Let me have a God-based attitude and a God-based view. That's our idea this morning. Now there's several points that we can draw out of here. The first, Lord, help me change my attitude about time. And you see that as verse 7 begins, the focus on time. There is a certain deadline that is here. We're talking about the end of this life. Whether it comes with the judgment or whether it comes with our death, there is an end that is rapidly approaching. And so he says, the end is here. This is a problem that all of mankind deals with. And I think it's the problem of procrastination. We aren't aware of time quite as much as we should be. Or maybe we don't respect time quite as much as we should. I was looking at some articles that were written about procrastination, and there are two things really that fit in here. One author called it the two lies of the procrastinator. The first is there's plenty of time. And this is something that casually drops into our conversation, even though it shouldn't. But we'll be talking about something we want to do, and we say, oh, well, there's plenty of time. Well, we don't know. We don't know because the Lord could come at any moment. After all, our life could end at any moment. So this idea of saying plenty of time, it's a falsehood. But the other big lie of procrastination, which is more dangerous, is, well, it would be better to do this other thing. And isn't that what happens with procrastination? We have something important to be done, but suddenly all these other little things seem so important we have to take care of them first. And we keep to put off that one thing. We keep putting it off further and further and further. And it's one thing to delay a research paper because you're on Facebook, but it's a different thing to delay service to God because you're more concerned about the issues of this life, with the temporary and with the physical. And so, Peter rightly says, the end is at hand. And we need today to say, Lord, help me change my attitude about time. In the book of John, chapter 9 and verse 4, we see Jesus address this issue. John chapter 9 and verse 4, he says, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. There's an idea here about industry, about the need, the desire, and the benefit of work, to go out into labor, and of course to do labor for God. But there's another idea here not to be missed, and it is that aspect of time. There is a time coming when the ability to do work is gone, because the deadline has passed, because our time here has expired. And there is no credit, there is no benefit, and there is no blessing for the intention to do God's service. There is the idea of whether or not you did. Did you go out and work? Did you go out and labor? Much the same is said in chapter 4 and verse 35. John 4:35, do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. The idea is go now. There's no reason to wait. There's no reason to delay and put it off again and again. Seek to do the Lord's work right now. And especially the idea of harvest, that there are souls out here hungry for the truth. And we as ambassadors of Christ, as Christians, those who are aware of the truth, believe on the name of Christ and wear the name of Christ, we need to be ready to carry that banner of truth. I want to show you two scenes in the book of Acts. We're just starting a study of the book of Acts in our Sunday morning class. If you're not a part of that, I want to invite you. Please do come for that. I think you'll benefit from it. But two pictures here, one from Acts 2 and one from Acts 24. Now, of course, you know Acts 2, the day of Pentecost, the beginning of the church. At the end of that chapter, in Acts 2 and verse 41, it says, Then those who gladly received his word were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. Souls added by the Lord to his church. And why were they added that day? Because they moved with urgency. Because they moved to obedience right then. Because they said, what should we do? Repent and be baptized? Let's do it. They saw the work of the Lord. They saw an action of obedience. And they were ready to undertake it. Now you compare and contrast that with Acts 24 and verse 25. Here we have Governor Felix, and Paul has had the opportunity to present to him not only the case of his own life, but the case of Jesus Christ. Give him an opportunity to react to truth. What will you do with Jesus, to put it in other words? And in Acts 24 and verse 25, it says, Now as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid, and answered, Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you. Now you see the huge difference here. It's not the instant jump into action. It's not the that day they were added because that day they obeyed. It's someday. where are we going to fall in this span of time looking at our own obedience? Whether or not we'll follow God. Will it be that day or will it be someday? To put off further into the future. Where do you think this position would put you in the day of judgment? Where would you rather be, on the hand of those in Acts 2 who obeyed that day and were added by the Lord to His church that day? Or would you rather be the someone who said, well, someday? A convenient time to put it off, to have good intentions, but not good follow-through. We need to seek the Lord's help in changing our attitude about time so that we would realize the urgency of obedience. Do the work of the Lord now while we have the opportunity to do it. But our key text in 1 Peter 4, it doesn't just talk about time. It also talks about things. Lord, help me to change my attitude about things. Because as he says the end is at hand, he's even more specific than that. In 1 Peter 4, he says the end of all things is at hand. Now you're like me because we are humans in the modern day. Things have a huge impact on our life. Things have a huge place in society. Think about the idea of a wish list. There are multiple online retailers where even if you're not going to buy their product today, you can put it on a wish list. And I'm here too. Amazon.com, I've got my wish list. I've got multiple ones. There are things that are saved there. And I have to be careful because some days you start to look at that wish list, you've logged in, and you say, well, these things would make life so great. These things, they're what I'm wishing for. They're what I want, what I desire. But we need to remember the truth that the best things in life aren't things. The best things in life is not stuff. And this trap of materialism is ready to grab hold of every one of us. We need to take the time to look away from that wish list and to look at all the good that is before us. The pool of materialism and the pool of all that good readily there oftentimes pulls us away from God. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus laid it out this way. Matthew 6, 19 to 21. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. And notice verse 21. This is the heart of the passage. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If we are focused on things, our heart is trapped in the gilded cage, in the allure of stuff and materialism. But we need to have a heart that treasures God, treasures righteousness, and seeks God so that our heart will be with God. The idea of wondering, where is my attention going? Where is my energy? Where is my devotion? Even where is my money going? That shows devotion, and a lot of times devotion is aimed right at stuff, right at things, rather than where it ought to be, at service, at God. Also, 2 Peter 3 and verse 10 points to the futility of materialism. 2 Peter 3 and verse 10, he says, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, the elements will melt with fervent heat, both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. And you see not only a reference to time, that we already talked about, the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, you don't know, but look at what happens to things. The elements to melt with fervent heat. The earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. And the word for burned up there in the Greek means to burn to nothing, to consume it wholly, entirely, until nothing remains. You think about the rich man who said, I'm going to tear down my barns and build greater, because he has so much stuff. And he even says, I'll say to my soul, take thine ease. You have much good stored up for many years. Eat, drink, and be merry. But of course the answer came back, your soul is required of you, and whose will these things be? These things are meaningless, because not only are they going to be burned up, but the earth that holds them is going to be burned up. If I could get everything on every wish list from every retailer that I've ever created for, all those things are gone. I can't take any of those things with me. And the same is true for you. If we are treasuring and valuing stuff, we need to realize how futile and how empty that is. All the stuff will be gone. You know what will be left? My soul and my relationship with God. And I need to make sure that that is not lacking. I would rather lack stuff and have a great soul than have great stuff and be lacking when my soul is measured. And maybe no one verse will speak to this point quite as clearly as this next one. 1 John chapter 2 really lays it on the line as far as materialism is concerned. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 and 16. He says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world." Now I want you to think about how silly a picture it is for someone to call themselves a Christian, but to not be of the Father. Christ made no bones about it. During His ministry, He laid it on the line clear for people to see time and time again. I and the Father are one. I must do the will of Him who sent me. I must be about my Father's business. And time again, He showed His unity with God. He was of the Father because He is God and He was serving Him. Now, if we're going to say we're Christians and wear the name of Christ, how foolish is it for us to be of the world? But that's where a lot of Christians find themselves, and it's because of verse 15, a love of the world and the things in the world. We need to be urgently and sincerely pleading and praying with God, help me change my attitude about things, because this is a trap that so many people are caught in. And they want to be of the Father, they want to serve God, they want to be a faithful Christian, they want to humbly walk with the King. They want to walk with Jesus, but they can't because their heart is trapped in stuff, trapped in things. Number 3, Lord, help me to change my attitude about life. And this is a broad one, but it really comes into the last part of our key text in 1 Peter. Because he says, the end of all things is at hand. And then he says, therefore be serious and watchful. The English Standard Version uses self-controlled and sober-minded. How do we view life? Are we just laid back and sort of reckless, taking life in a haphazard sort of way, well, come what may? Or are we serious about life? Do we realize the importance of it? And are we reverent in our attitude towards God and doing His will? The idea of being self-controlled and sober-minded is to say, will you be clear-headed? Will you be cautious? Will you be serious and reverent when it comes to life? Another word I like is sound. We'll see this many times in the New Testament, but look at 2 Timothy 1 and verse 7. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And I want to urge you as you look at this verse to don't stop short as you start reading it. Because a lot of people get to the point of not having a spirit of fear, but of power, and they say, well, there it is. We can be bold, we can be powerful, we don't have to be afraid. Well, that's true, but don't miss the end of the verse. He says you need to be loving, and above all, you need to have a sound mind. And this word in the Greek is very close to the word for sober mind that we saw in our key text, 1 Peter 4. But to have a sound mind is to be disciplined, to have that self-control. And it's almost a combination of both of these words, serious and watchful. And it's that same idea, clear-headedly cautious. That's where we find ourselves, in a sound mind. Titus 2 says much the same in verses 1 and 2. But as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine, that the older men be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, in patience. The further context of Titus 2 talks about not just the older men and the younger men, but the older women and the younger women, and all the congregation, and how Titus is going to relate to them, how they're going to relate to each other. And it all hinges on this point of being disciplined, of having that soundness in mind. How will you regard life? You will regard it with the seriousness that comes from focus. Focus on God and His will. Also, James chapter 1 lays it out even more clearly for us, because it compares it to the man who's not focused. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 5. It says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God." And then picking up in verse 6, it says, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. This picture of a double-minded man is just the opposite. Literal meaning is two-spirited. He is vacillating. He is changing back and forth. He's fickle. He's not focused. He's not disciplined. He is not set on what would be serious and self-controlled, the will of God. He moves back and forth. And this is where we find a lot of people today, even within the church, because they are trying to live in both realms, to live for God in the church and to live like the world. And you can't do both. No man can serve two masters, as Christ put it. So don't be that double-minded man, and the greatest source for help in that is seeking God. One man said, "I don't know what the future may hold, but I know who holds the future." And I thought, what a great quote to carry with this idea. Because we are trying to look at life in the right way. And a big part of that is going to be looking at God rather than looking at self. I can be serious, I can be watchful, I can be self-controlled and sober-minded by trusting in God, by looking to how He will lead and how He guides me, rather than trying to stand on my own wisdom and my own ideas. Don't be that man tossed to and fro. Don't be the double-minded man. Focus and have the attitude towards life as God would lay out. Now the last point is most important. Number 4 is prayer. Lord, help me change my attitude with prayer. The very last part of our key text, the end of all things is at hand, therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers. This part is key. Because after all, what we've been doing through this whole lesson, Lord, help me to change this. One of the key ways that's going to happen is by seeking Him. Seek the Lord in prayer. We know of the value of prayer and how it's lauded in Scripture. But what I want to do is take you to a different passage. And I don't think this has been brought up with the idea of prayer, at least not from me before, but it's really key. People naturally pray when they suppose that the end is coming. And he talks about the end of all things here, 1 Peter. But I want you to look at Psalm 107. The 107th Psalm, I'm going to start reading in verse 23. And he's writing here about really the power of prayer. Psalm 107, beginning in verse 23, it says, "Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters, they see the works of the Lord, and His wonders in the deep. For He commands and raises the stormy wind." And through this section, he talks about the storm raising and how it starts to really brew and churn in the sea. Then you pick up in verse 28. He says, "Then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble, and He brings them out of their distresses. He calms the storm so that its waves are still." This picture spells out everything we've talked to up to this point. They start out, they're merchantmen, they're going on the sea, they're sailors, and they have a set way of thinking. They have a set way of feeling. They have an attitude about the world and their place in it and their power. But then everything changes because trouble comes. Here's a storm. Here's a threat to your life. Here's danger in the world around you. And so their attitude changes about time because they say the end is near. We may die on this sea. Their attitude changes about things because it's no longer about their ship and their voyage and their cargo. It's about their soul. It's about their life at the end of all things. Their attitude changes about life, and so what do? They pray. They seek the Lord and His help. Now what I want us to focus on for our purposes today, and as we make application to our own life, if you can see this picture spelled out so beautifully in Psalm 107, react to it beforehand. Don't learn these lessons the hard way like these sailors before the clouds are even in the sky. Seek the Lord then. Seek Him in prayer then, because after all, this key of our life, this attitude, is rooted on prayer. And when Peter writes that, 1 Peter 4:7, he says, "Do this in your prayers." And so now, since we know time is short, right now, this very day, seek the Lord. And then when this trouble comes, when the storms of life brew, we'll already be prepared because we already stand with God. And this picture of the last part of this verse will be the same for us today. He calms the storm so that its waves are still. Because you know the truth, the life of the Christian is not a life without problems, but it's a life with solutions. Because the strength of Christ, the strength of His Word, and the strength of the church gives us what we need to weather these storms, to go through these hard times. And we have the provision that says, yes, there may be threats to my life. Yes, there may be dangers. But my soul is strong because my Lord is strong. My soul is protected. It is there in the harbor where God is the harbor master. And that's a beautiful picture. We need to have this way of thinking in our prayers. So Lord, help us to change our attitude through prayer. Now we have to ask the question, isn't it time that we changed our attitude, changed our way of thinking? And looking at your own life, what has your attitude been through all these years? What has your attitude been towards the church? What has your attitude been towards Christ? What's your attitude been towards Bible study, or toward evangelism, or toward obeying the gospel, putting on Christ in baptism? For years and years you've had a certain set attitude. But you have to ask, is this man's way of thinking, or is this God's way of thinking? Because you know the truth of the Scripture, we've looked at it together this morning. Time is short. Things are gone. Life is serious. And prayer is powerful. You remember that quote from Thomas Jefferson. He said, "There is nothing that can stop the man with the right attitude, and there's nothing that can help the man with the wrong attitude." Well, let's kind of tweak that for our purposes, because we know this is not necessarily about positive thinking. It's about thinking the way God does, having God's attitude. And so I'll tell you, for the Christian, nothing can stop a Christian who has God's attitude, God's way of thinking. But in the same way, nothing can help the Christian who does not have God's attitude, who has a different way of thinking. If you're not yet a Christian this morning, of course, that opportunity is available to you. To have your attitude aligned with God, and to begin your service to Him by putting on Christ in the waters of baptism, having your sins washed away. And if you are a Christian, maybe you've drifted from God. Maybe it's been the pull of materialism. Maybe it's been thinking you've got plenty of time, you'll serve God later. Don't let that be the case. Let us be faithful servants of God now, who are totally devoted to Him and not to life in this earth. Let it be said that we are loving, that we are of the Father, and that we are His humble servants. If there's any way that we can assist you this morning, we would invite you to come as together we stand and sing.